Well, thank you, everybody. Let's get rolling here. Mike, you say you like to raise the hard questions to issues, and we like to think that we do too, so we should get along just fine. We think we get along just fine.
Yeah, we do get along just fine, Bill.
The perception is that your administration has prioritized unfettered development over rational and supported growth. Citywide, we're at 2/3 of our growth targets for 2024, with permitted projects putting us to meeting our 2024 targets. But this cycle of unprecedented growth in the city is marred by increased congestion, development without parking, inadequate public transit, and deteriorating roads, all of which make getting around this city for some quite intolerable. Particularly for many here today, the neighborhood's constituency from the far ends of the city, we have not done well. Clearly, transportation is a growth management issue. Do you acknowledge the gap in transportation capacity? And if so, what will you do in your second term to correct these issues?
Sure, absolutely. I'm going to stand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. You have 2 minutes.
Oh, that's too long. Jeez.
Do we have to hold that?
Yeah, who is this for? Is this for the camera person?
It's a room mic.
Okay.
room.
Oh, it's a room mic. How am I sounding?
30 seconds.
Hey, come on now. Don't start my time here. We're just testing technology here. No, the fact of the matter is that cities, and the city like Seattle is now an extraordinarily attractive place for people to start businesses, to grow businesses, to move to. This is one of the major challenges we face. And we are going to have to figure out how we can work to accommodate people in a way that preserves and enhances our quality of life. This is something that I worked on for years as a president of the Greenwood Community Council. It's why I worked to get the Parks levy on the ballot over the objections of the prior mayor. It's one of the reasons I ran. I thought government was getting too far from the people. And we have worked to get more dollars out into the neighborhoods so that we can invest in our neighborhoods as they take growth. And I'll point to the fact that we've increased the maintenance budget by 37% the last 2 years. We have a Safe Routes to School program, which is going to put $14.8 million into Safe Routes to School. We're actually going to start investing in some of those sidewalks that people have spoken about. Put together a coalition of 47 mayors across the state to work to come up with a local funding option to help bring transit to Seattle. We have a transit master plan passed by the council, and it points out something that all of you would know. You don't need an expert to tell you this. We're getting better at connecting regional centers to regional centers in our region. We're not very good at connecting neighborhood to neighborhood with transit. So we're working to improve neighborhood transit connections in cooperation with Metro on Rapid Ride, but also talking about how we can invest on top of Sound Transit to improve transit. We're pushing to get Sound Transit to the ballot by 2016. We're jointly planning with them to get to Ballard, and I'd love to get to West Seattle in that next package as well. I could talk a lot about transportation. I'm passionate about it. Our neighborhoods deserve more local street funding and more transit, and I've made that a priority in my years in this administration.
Ed, thank you. Ed, you have 2 minutes to critique Mike's answer. Is that the right answer, or would you do something different?
Well, thank you. And Ed Murray from Capitol Hill, but I started out my life in Alki, and have had a chance to work with many of you going back to when I worked on the city council back 22 years ago for Martha Cho. I think that there's several issues that are interconnected here that we've got to focus on. One is, I think, over a series of years, a series of administrations, the Department of Neighborhood hoods is atrophied, basically. And what's happened as a result of that is the urban village process that was put in place in the 90s, actually back when I worked on the council and was around to watch that develop, has frayed. And we're really, in my opinion, not following that. That was a complete community approach, a complete neighborhood approach. And I think what's lacking now is that connection between how we grow, how you are all involved in making those decisions about the growth in your own neighborhoods. And I think we can only get back to that kind of model if we get back to a pretty vibrant Department of Neighborhoods. On transportation, which is related, we plan transportation in this city in buckets. We have a bike plan and we have a transit plan. We have a freight mobility plan that's not done, and we have a PED plan. The problem is we need to look at neighborhoods as corridors and figure out what is the best way to move people through that neighborhood. And that might mean that not all bike lanes and buses and cars are all on the same street. I would take a very different approach as we grow to how we approach planning transportation. All of those are vibrant, vital, important parts of how we need to move forward on transportation. But I don't think we have a transportation plan, an integrated one that connects us as neighborhoods, and we've gotten involved in mode wars.
Okay.
And my time is
Mike,
up.
you have 1 minute to respond to what Ed said.
Well, actually, we do have separate plans, including a freight plan underway. They do cross-reference each other, and they are subject to a transportation strategic plan, which is, in fact, coming up for its update right now as part of the comprehensive plan. We have done a lot of neighborhood planning. In our first year, what we did was we did a full-on update of the Broadview Bitter Lake plan and the Rainier Beach plan. But we have changed approach. Rather than updating broadly, going out to everybody and says, let's start all over again and replan, what we're doing is we're focusing our planning efforts within neighborhoods on what matters. So we've done that on the light rail station areas, and we've done new comprehensive outreach of that, and we brought more departments to the table. And DON is working better with other departments than it ever has done before because we're breaking down silos in government. So we've done the light rail station areas. We have a planning process underway in Ballard, one in the U District, one in Northgate. And if you take a look at the full list of neighborhood planning efforts underway, you'll see it's robust and it's bringing in new people that haven't been included before in the discussion.
That's a great segue. Starting with Greg Nichols and continued to some degree under your administration, we've turned from, to some degree, what a lot of people think is a Seattle-based, community-based neighborhood planning model into one that seems to be more centrally controlled by DPD. And we, as you mentioned, we're narrowly having our discussions. However, there was a neighborhood planning advisory commission convened by the city a few years ago that made many recommendations about how neighborhood planning should be done. And very few of those recommendations have been adopted. In fact, a number of people in this room were part of that. And there were a number of minority reports against what the recommendation that was made. Council has not helped the situation by only allotting a few neighborhood plan updates per year. And at the rate we're doing, we'll be into our next 20-year cycle before we get all the neighborhoods in. As an example, in the central area here, we're going through a 23rd Avenue action plan update.
Right.
So we're making some investments in 23rd Avenue, and associated with that, we're looking at making streetscape type changes. Yet only after 6 months into the project, just a week or two ago, the city announced to the neighborhood that there was going to be upzoning associated with that plan. So how do you see this conversation going with the neighborhoods where they're caught off guard, where we're doing these, quote, tactical action plans, but at the same time we're potentially changing the face of the neighborhood, and we're doing it after the fact, and most people aren't aware of that?
Well, who should we
I'm
start
sorry.
with?
You've got 2 minutes to respond to that.
Oh, okay. And you won't surprise you that I don't agree with how you're characterizing everything, Bill, and I do appreciate our lively back and forth on this. You know, when I was in Greenwood, when we did the neighborhood plan update, I got involved in, that's how I got involved actually in local affairs, was working on our own Greenwood neighborhood plan. And what it did was it set out a set of broad values, but for the most part it wasn't really focused on implementation. Some neighborhood plans were better than others at having implementable ideas in them. You know, Ballard, for example, was great. They had their park, you know, condemn the Safeway, where they wanted the library, all of those things. You know, Greenwood, we weren't so good at that. We ended up having to follow on with subsequent neighborhood plans to talk about what are we going to do in the business district? What are we going to do with the Greenwood corridor? And I say neighborhood planning efforts, but it wasn't redo the whole plan. And so again, when we started, we redid at a high level Rainier Beach and Broadview Bitter Lake. And it's a high degree, a lot of resources were required, and this was in a constrained time. And what we heard from people was, for the most part, the overall objectives and values contained in their neighborhood plans were good. What they wanted in neighborhoods was focused planning on implementation that would actually lead to changes there. And we have worked to change how we do planning, and this has been endorsed by the City Council by resolution as well, in which what we do is we identify, you know, when we identify the need, we do the planning. Now, 23rd is a great example. We could have gone into 23rd and just repaved 23rd in pretty much exactly the way it looks and spent a lot of money. But what I heard from folks in Delridge neighborhood folks, Pete Spalding and others, they said, hey, if you're going to come to our neighborhood and repave a major arterial, it really matters to us how you do it. And we want you to think about the neighborhood business districts along the route. So we're doing 23rd differently than we've done a repaving project before. Instead of SDOT coming in saying we're building a road here, we partnered with DPD, we partnered with the Department of Neighborhoods, we held comprehensive outreach to hear from people about how do they want this project to help fulfill their vision of the neighborhood. And what we heard from them was, we want wider sidewalks, we want the traffic calmed, it goes through 3 different neighborhood districts that matter, and we're in fact going to be spending more on that project than we otherwise would have, and the bike lane in this case will go on an alternate route because it just doesn't fit there. So that is an example of us taking a road paving project and making it a neighborhood planning project, and that's the way we're trying to approach all of our major investments in neighborhoods now, thinking about them holistically with the neighborhood involved.
I guess I'm going to follow up on that. In that particular instance, we're doing zoning changes. Now, this particular urban village is already at 200% of its growth targets. We have plenty of existing zoning capacity to support additional growth for the next, 20 years or more. Yet we're going through and rezoning in that neighborhood after the fact of talking to the neighborhoods up front and describing to them, and we're not telling the community how many more people we're going to be taking. I'm not saying that's bad, I don't think anyone's against it, it's just more of the process of why is that unexplained to people up front? Why are we doing it 6 months into the process? People get burned out after 6 months. The last meeting where this was announced at had the least attendance out of all the meetings. Okay, why are we withholding this information from people?
We're not going to rezone. We don't rezone anywhere without a lot of public input and a lot of public discussion about it. That's just the way it works. And I think when you look at, when you look at this neighborhood, we're going to be asking, and I'm not actually that familiar with discussions of rezoning there, in these neighborhoods. But when you look at these, it's not just about how many people does it accommodate. It's what do we want the buildings to look like? What are the uses we want in the neighborhood? And can we leverage public investments out of the private investment? And in some cases, again, I'm going to go look at Greenwood. What was most important to us in Greenwood when we did our neighborhood business district planning was to get a connection from Greenwood Avenue back to the Fred Meyer. And that was something we did a long time ago. We're now seeing that come to fruition. If you come up to Greenwood, you're going to see that the McDonald's is gone, and we have new buildings there, and we have a new approach. And those are the types of things that you work out by bringing the property owners, the residents, and the agencies to the table to have that dialogue. And I think that's all we're doing up there on 23rd Street.
That's actually not what we're doing there.
But what's interesting here, Bill, is, what's interesting here is, I'm happy, I love to have these dialogues, and let's invite us out, and I'll come out to that neighborhood, and we'll have that dialogue, and you and I can have a conversation about that with the whole community.
I want to ask Ed. Ed,
Can
do
you
you see an issue with neighborhood planning, and would your administration do something different?
Okay.
You have 2 minutes.
Okay, sure. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to answer the original question, but my question is, do I see a difference in neighborhood planning? What would I do differently? So to some extent, I already answered this. I believe that the neighborhood planning process has atrophied. I believe that the neighborhood plans that we worked on in the 1990s have been allowed to languish. And I believe that we need to do something to revitalize that. I would go back to a model that looked like the Department of Neighborhoods before Greg Nichols was in office. But more importantly, in my first 100 days in office, I would have a neighborhood summit so that we could identify the issues, the problems that we've had over the last several administrations with the neighborhoods and with the city, so that we can move forward in preparing for the update of the comprehensive plan of 2015. Because that summit that I would call in those first 100 days would be the way we could revitalize the department, be prepared for the comprehensive plan, and I believe revitalize the urban village concept. In addition, I think that we don't do a very good job of working across departments. I actually think that it's more siloed than I've ever seen it. There's an underutilized sub-cabinet, capital sub-cabinet, that I think needs to be revitalized. I think you see it on your streets. If you think you're seeing a lot of coordination on your streets, then you must live in a different neighborhood than I do. So I would take a very different approach.
Okay. Ed, you're up. Mayor McGinn is very fond of saying that there's no school for being mayor. The city is complex. We have lots of bureaucratic drag, 10,000 employees, and probably everyone in this room will attest, a myriad of problems of things to be fixed. You've indicated that you will bring a different style of government leadership to City Hall, an approach that may be less combative than Mike's reputation suggests. But without executive experience and without real close experience to how the city operates in detail, how do you plan to run this city better than Mike?
Well, first of all, I actually believe that there is a mayor's school, and it's called Experience in Government. And in many ways, Gary Locke is an example of somebody who served on and chaired the same budget committees I did, as did Booth Gardner. Both left the legislature and became mayors of, county executives. Wes Allman came from the legislature, for those of you who remember Wes as mayor, and became a fairly effective mayor. I think the reason is, you know, I've had to work on several budgets, and all of them are significantly larger than the City of Seattle's budget. Every single department, you know, whether it's OSPI, whether it's natural resources, whether it's the healthcare department, you know the state agencies, WashDOT, the State Patrol. I've had to examine their function and their budgets in great detail. I don't think it's an issue of style. I think it's an issue of how you govern. And the only way I've learned in Olympia to get things done is by reaching out to people that are different than myself. And, you know, as far as forcing the issue and changing culture and challenging the status quo, I think that there's very few people who've had to do what I've had to do in Olympia over the my 18 years there, going into a place where people wouldn't even shake my hand because of who I was and the issues I worked on, to the point that those same people would vote on transportation packages and would actually turn around and change their vote on gay marriage. I think those are the skills I bring. It's not about style, it's about how you govern, how you build coalitions. And that is, I think, what Merit School is.
Mike, you want 1 minute response?
Sure, I'm not going to ask you to repeat the question, though. So here's the deal. Let's look at outcomes. When I took office, we had very high unemployment. We had to face deep cuts in our budget, and those were very challenging. We have balanced our budget every year, finished in the black, rebuilt the rainy day fund. And we did that with the city council. We adopted a new policy to rebuild the rainy day fund. We did that without cutting human services. We protected human services across the board. And we also, when times as we worked with you, went out and held, listened to over 3,000 people in multiple town halls, and we came forward, and the public supported, and the council supported, doubling the Families in Education levy. We've expanded the Seattle Youth Violence Prevention Initiative. We have a transit master plan underway where we are now partnering with Sound Transit to plan light rail to Ballard, and we've helped work with them to accelerate their planning so that they are looking at a Sound Transit ballot measure by 2016, and they're also looking at downtown to West Seattle, Ballard to the U District, and U District over 520. These are all things that we got done, and these are outcomes. So what's underlying the combative question is, are we getting things done? And the answer we are, and we put the tough questions out on the table, and we deal with them. And being an executive is different from being a legislator. There's just no comparison, really. You know, when it snows, you get yourselves to the EOC. You know, when there's a shooting, you find the chief. And when there's a tragedy in the community, you get out to the community and you work with them. Now, I'm happy to compare that record of outcomes with my opponent's record of outcomes. He says that he has 18 years of experience. He's a leader in the legislature. We are 43rd in the nation in per capita spending per student. We are 50th in mental health beds. We have the most regressive state and local tax system in the nation. Metro's about to be cut by 17%. I am happy to compare the outcomes we have achieved under my leadership with the outcomes the state has achieved with Senator Murray as one of the leaders.
We're going to start doing a round of questions from the floor. Show of hands. Yusef, you want to?
Well, I have a question, and may begin. I believe that your transportation policy has disadvantaged the low-income community and working families. You openly supported policies that increase the cost of owning a car, like increasing cat fee, increasing parking rate, promoting anti-taxi and limo bills in the city council and as well as Olympia. I get all that, and I support the idea of promoting mass transit because of the global warming solution, gas prices, and etc. However, you are doing your transportation policy without addressing its impact on the working families. My question to you
Excuse me,
is,
sir, we're doing 30 seconds. I'm
if
sorry.
you get elected another 4 years, what would you do differently to mitigate its impact on low-income communities? And Senator Ed Mary, I want to ask you, if you get elected, what policy do you have in place to make sure that your policy doesn't impact certain group of people?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the single highest household expense is housing, and we all know that. And I'm sure we will and have the opportunity to talk about housing costs in the city of Seattle. The next highest household expense after housing is transportation. Nationwide, on average, it's 20% of a person's budget. For a low-income person, it's an even higher percentage, as is housing. In fact, you can see the data where there are many people who are putting 50, 60, 70%, particularly low-income people, into both housing and transportation combined. So when you're looking at how to make the city more affordable, housing is a piece of the puzzle and transportation is a piece of the puzzle. And the single greatest expense for people is, in fact, automobiles, the cost of owning, insuring, maintaining, gassing up, and paying parking, and all of the other things associated with an automobile is very, very expensive. So what we know is if we can get good, reliable transit, and we can get a mix of uses near each other and make it easier for people to walk to and from their destinations or even bike to and from their destinations, they can put a lot of money in their pocket, and they can also have a healthier lifestyle as well, because they'll integrate physical activity into their daily lives. And that's another huge issue we face amongst our lower income populations, is the disparity in safe places to walk, safe places to bike, as well as transit access. That's why I've worked so hard on enhancing transit, moving transit more, helping get Sound Transit to the ballot, and putting together a statewide coalition to get more money for transit. We put more money into all of those things because that will make it easier for people to get around and less expensive to get around.
So, you can't simply put the city on a road diet unless you can build the transit that you replace it with. Now, the mayor, as you can hear, everything wrong with the city is the legislature's fault. But actually, I'm proud of the fact that I put together a transportation package that actually created the safe routes to schools that the mayor referred that he's going to add city money to, and they have in the past as well. I'm proud that we returned the pedestrian program. I'm proud that we returned money for our local bus services as a result of putting a 15 tab on every single car in the state to go into transit. So I'm proud of my record, and you know your legislators, David Frock, Sharon Nelson, Frank Chop, Eileen Cody. We didn't cut because we wanted to cut and hurt education and we were spending money elsewhere. That's the Republican argument. We raised taxes, and regrettably the people turned those taxes down. And we're not done in trying to fund the things that we need to fund. And when it comes to the Metro bus services, we're not done with that either. And that's why the bus drivers endorse me, because I've gotten money for Metro before and they know I can do it again. And finally, I worked on a program that sounds counterintuitive, but most people coming out of poverty, their job isn't in the central city, it's out in a strip mall. And we actually worked with poverty programs to subsidize the purchase of cars. By the way, this was supported by some environmental organizations, so those people could go from poverty to their first job. So it's not an either-or answer when it comes to transportation. It's a mix of things, given where we live in the region.
I have a two-part question, if you would, gents. If you would, either write it down or from memory, tell us what you believe is the cost to cure the deficiencies in our streets, our water system, and our parks. And then I have a follow-on. And Mike, if you would go first, Mr. Mayor, if you please go first, and Mr. Kennedy, if you...
You can call us Mike. You can call us Mike and Ed.
Mike and Ed works.
Just numbers. Parks, streets, and water system. What are the numbers that we would need to cure the deficiencies in those three systems?
So the streets number is up there. I want to say somewhere around 1.6 bill or so.
1.8 billion. But
1.8.
that does not
I get to answer the question. You got to wait.
That includes non-arterials, does not include non-arterials.
Right.
So if we could just,
Can we get another chair up here for Bill to testify, man? I feel like I got a third candidate in the room here with Bill. Come on, man, be the moderator, man.
You're right.
What was the number for streets?
1.8 billion,
Okay,
around
1.8.
there.
Okay, parks?
Parks, the number that's been around there is around 260 million, and I don't have a sewer number for you.
Streets?
I said streets was 1.8.
Okay,
You said
water.
water, I don't have the utility number, we're actually, and,
Okay, now I have
go
a
ahead.
following question.
Go ahead.
To Murray, Mr. Murray. As far as you know from your study of the city's financial needs, for parks, streets, and water, what is the dollar number for each that you think is?
So what I understand is 1.8 for the streets and sidewalks, and that does not include, as he already said, more of the back neighborhood streets. It's
And then
more of
water?
an, water is, my understanding was 250, the mayor said it was 260. And I'm
parks?
sorry, not on water, parks is 250, the water number I do not know. But the parks piece is mostly happened in the last 4
Okay,
years.
here's the real question behind those questions. To the mayor, are the numbers needed to cure those three deficiencies that you've both just spoken about, in priority to the amount of money spent for bike lanes?
Oh.
How do you justify, and what is the amount spent for bike lanes, and is that a higher priority than street parking?
you know, the bike lane expenses are, I'm glad you asked that question, frankly.
So the number is, how much?
The number that, this is now a little bit old, but the amount we spend on pure, as part of our SDOT budget, bike spending has been around 2%, you know, the pure bike
So how
spending.
many millions is that?
I don't know how many millions that is, but 3% of the trips are being taken by bikes, so it's actually a pretty efficient use of dollars. And I think it's a false dichotomy, and let me tell you why. When you go in and you have to, if that's your question is what are we, and I'm gonna interpret your question about priorities and bicycling versus other investments as a priority. The fact of the matter is, the way people are choosing to use our streets is changing. And we've seen, in fact, that biking has grown the fastest, walking has grown very fast, transit has grown, and driving has gone down. The other reason I think that that's a false trade-off when we propose it that way is that, in fact, everybody uses local streets. The way I tend to think about it, so when we go in and redo a local street, like 23rd, for example, what we have to do is talk about how will it accommodate walking, biking, transit, automobiles, freight. You have to look at how that corridor will accommodate all modes. And we do that in every place. And when we move people into bicycles or walking or transit because they want to do it and it's safer to do it, that actually can reduce wear and tear on our roadways and reduce expenses for our city as a whole and reduce expenses for people also. So that's, to me, the big buckets are how much money are we spending on local streets, which take care of all modes, how much money are we spending on transit to help move people around, and how much money are we spending on big, massive, limited access freeway projects outside the city, which cost billions and which change the climate. We're spending too much on that and not enough on the first two.
Ed?
So the question was, if I could capsulize again, was how do you justify or prioritize those needs for those other three systems as opposed to the money we spend on bike lanes?
Well, you know, I think this gets into what I've called mode wars, where we get fixated on one mode versus the other. And I don't think that we have to pit bicyclists against cars, against buses. I think how we're doing it has created that situation, and we need to go back and, as I said earlier, develop a different planning approach. But I think the issue is whether you're a bicyclist, whether you drive a car, or you're a pedestrian, or you ride a bus, you know that the sidewalks and streets are worse off, and they've grown worse off over the last several years. And the amount of repair that was supposed to happen under the last Bridging the Gap levy has not happened. So we have to take care of basics. We have to go back out with a new Bridging the Gap levy. We have to identify what it is we are going to repair so that folks actually see the projects so that they will be willing to buy it. To me, that's the problem, is the crumbling infrastructure. I don't think it's an issue of pitting one against the other, but I do think whether you use any of those modes, you have to have a basic infrastructure that's up to date. And the ratings in some of our roads by sort of the national standards are pretty significantly low. And on bicyclists, you know, we're actually dropping behind cities like Minneapolis, where they have snow and ice, but they've seen bicyclists increase over the last 4 years, greater than Seattle has. So we're not getting that right either.
Okay,
Okay, Leshi's bus number 27 is on the list of routes to be deleted by Metro. I understand Metro is King County. I understand funding has to be approved by the Tea Party types in Olympia. But when Leshi residents can't get to work on the bus, can't get to college classes, can't get to the doctor, that's a Seattle problem. So I want to know specifically what you would do regardless of what Metro does.
Well, first of all, I will own the fact that we did not get a transportation budget out of this session. But my experience over the years is it usually takes more than one session on transportation. When I became transportation chair, it had been almost 15 years. It's not going to be 15 years this time. And you hit on the very reason we're going to get there, and I believe we'll get there before the end of the year. The governor said he'll call us back before the Apple Cup. Those East Side senators and representatives who are Republicans, that 17% cut would be devastating to them. Their roads would be packed with cars, and they're starting to get this. You know, they did this they thought they could do a town hall and go around this state and hear about how, like, people didn't want this, additional money for Metro or for other projects. They heard the exact opposite. So I believe.
It's 1 minute on.
Oh, it's 1 minute, that's
Trying
why
to
we've
keep
been
to it.
messing up.
Yeah, well,
I
we're-
kept thinking it's 2 minutes and going,
We're
wow,
messing
that's
up
ending
too.
fast.
My bad.
We're messing up.
Now
too,
that we
but
know it's 1 minute,
Okay.
Reminder-
I think we both thought they were
Reminder
2 minutes.
everybody, your very important questions.
Our apology.
Please craft your question in 30 seconds. Thank you.
We do have the ability to wrap our heads into 2 minutes and 1 minute, so I'll try to give you a 1 minute answer to that question. I'm sorry, I get to,
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, sorry.
1 minute.
1 minute, thank you. So I did work to put together a coalition of 47 mayors and to try to get a new local option to us. It's being held hostage, as you mentioned, by the Tea Party Republicans in the Senate. And, that's a problem that we lost the Senate this year. That's a big problem. We are putting dollars into, we try to speed the buses through by how we change our streets, and sometimes it's controversial, but we try to improve that, and we'll put more money into that. We put $1.5 million from Bridging the Gap, and we have spent the money on Bridging Gap just the way we said we would, and we have increased our funding for transportation. I am supportive of a King County-only measure. If the legislature doesn't act, I am supportive of a Seattle-only measure if the legislature doesn't act, because I am tired of them holding buses hostage to their big highway projects. That's not leadership for the future.
Thank you.
I want to highlight the differences between these two fine gentlemen. For Senator Murray first, what are some specific things that the present administration has done in the area of transportation and land use that you would cancel, roll back, change radically, whatever? And then I'd like the mayor to respond to your list.
Okay. And it's 1 minute, right?
Yes.
I'd like 2 minutes, but if it's one.
Okay. Since I didn't know I had 1 minute last time, the rest of your question is, I support a county-only solution if we can't. I believe the legislature will act, but county-only, because the tens of thousands of people who live in Seattle and work across the east side are not going to be benefited if we break this from Seattle one part and King County another part. To get to your question, I think I would begin with the viaduct and the tunnel. I would have chosen to work with the state, and I would have kept my promise not to oppose it, and to oppose it not just on the policy side, but on the campaign side. I think we've lost years of building good relationships with the state. That whole situation has poisoned the atmosphere. Secondly, I would have chosen to, as Austin did, to cooperate with the Obama Justice Department when they came in here and said we had racial bias policing and we had overuse of force. I would have chosen up front because I believe we could have gotten at the issues of race up front, and I would not have fought the city council at the end of the process when they selected one of the best monitors in the nation for our police department. So those are things that how I would have approached things differently. The growth issue, as I said earlier, we need to have that first 100-day session so that we can relook at how our neighborhood planning is going, how we can get back to those plans, how we can connect it to the comp plan, and my time.
Yeah. So, first of all, my position was consistent throughout. I didn't believe I opposed the cost overruns. I opposed the cost overrun provision, and I believe that should be fixed before we proceeded. Put that to a vote of the people. I lost. Not a single day has been lost on this project because my agencies were fully cooperating with WashDOT on a policy perspective the entire time. And I will point out that cost overrun provision was put into law by Senator Murray. He voted for it. He told the state
I
that
voted
Seattle
for
would
it.
pay. He told Seattle that the state would pay. That was the most divisive political move I think I've ever seen. He said he
Not
voted
true.
for it even though it's
It's
unconstitutional.
not true. It's not true.
So, my turn, my 1 minute, please.
Well, we should stick with the truth.
Senator Murray, is it my 1
Well,
minute?
We shouldn't lie.
Is it my 1 minute?
Sure, it's your 1 minute.
Thank you. Really, Senator Murray, really?
No, well, really, you
Come
should
on,
tell
really?
you should tell the truth, Mayor.
Did you vote for it?
You said I put the provision in. I did not put the provision in.
Did the bill have your name on it that passed?
It did pass.
And it had your name on the top of it?
Yes, because we
Yes.
needed to move forward on transportation.
Okay.
Instead of being
That was
here.
the most divisive political move I have ever seen, telling one group of people one thing and another group another.
Not true.
With respect to the DOJ, Senator Murray also said, when asked on King TV the other night, Mr. Murray said, is there anything, do you disagree with anything in the consent decree that we entered into? And he said, probably not. Probably not. So he doesn't disagree with the outcome. And I think your question was very revealing, because the outcome of the viaduct is what it is. The outcome of the DOJ is what it is. He doesn't disagree with those outcomes, but he managed to answer the question without saying if he would have done anything different on bike lanes or done anything different on something else. I think Ed is trying to tell you he may disagree with me on things, but he won't actually identify where he disagrees. And I think an honest public debate should say, is there a bike lane we shouldn't have done? Is there a bus lane we shouldn't have done? Is there a road paving project we shouldn't have done? That would be an honest way to approach this issue.
I'm gonna do the quick follow-up on this. We had a question sent to me from someone who wasn't able to make it tonight. And she sent me an email from Judy Cliburn related to this topic, right? She said there's no bill necessary to sort out this funding thing, that the state is on the contract, that the city is not. We're assigned owners of the state is assigned owners of the contract. We're working with Seattle and it's working well. Basically, they're saying Seattle's not on the hook and there's no need to sort this out legislatively. But this person wants to know, related to the seawall and the waterfront development, the city and the state agreed that the city is taking the lead for the conceptual design of the Alaskan Way surface relocation. The city published a waterfront street design consideration for review. They begin to build public expectation about the street's design. They may also result in costs that exceed the state's allocation for that implementation. Thus, it is critical for the city and the state to continue their discussions and memorialize those discussions in a binding agreement regarding roles, responsibilities, and expectation for the state's funding in order to avoid any potential impact to the follow-on projects of the Deep Bore Tunnel. Ed?
So, I didn't tell the citizens of Seattle one thing and Olympia another thing. I stood on the floor of the Senate when that bill passed and said how I opposed the cost overrun. It's on tape. So, again, the facts don't meet reality, or his version of the facts don't meet reality. And it was a provision that I preferred not to be in there, but I also knew the viaduct had to come down because it's dangerous. The legislature had voted the largest amount of money to any city in the history of the state's history, $2.2 billion. And that was going to go away if we continued the food fight in Seattle over the viaduct. That's why I took that vote. And the clarification I think that you got. But there was another part of that question that I'm not sure I...
Related to the waterfront and the waterfront development,
Okay.
there's state
Yeah.
funding for that,
So-
the city's design.
So again, the mayor said I wasn't unwilling to distinguish. I've said several times, we don't plan transportation right. We don't do neighborhood planning right. We plan transportation in buckets. It doesn't work for you because it's not integrated. That's the problem. Not where things are placed, but how we go about it that end up where things shouldn't be. We don't do neighborhood planning the way we once did neighborhood planning. You are not involved in your neighborhood plans anymore. It has been centralized in downtown Seattle, and I would change that. So that's where the differences lie.
Okay, Dennis?
Oh, done, I get my
Oh,
turn.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I thought I got to rebut you, now you're rebutting
No,
me.
that was a question from
The
Bill.
follow-up question, and it's specifically related to the
From a
waterfront.
But I want to answer the follow-up question.
That's from a representative in our legislature, that woman.
No.
No, it was
One
somebody
about-
else
it was
referencing
somebody-
the
someone sent it
representative.
in and
Oh.
referring to
Yeah.
that email.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Go.
Ed just said something. Did something go in where it shouldn't have? That was actually the question I think that you were asking and I was asking. Did something go in where it shouldn't have? Is there a bike lane or rechannelization project that was done under this administration that you would reverse? Is a question I would pose to you. Is there a I know I'm getting in, I'm gonna use my time like he did.
It was my question.
Is there a bus lane priority project that you would reverse? You know, is there an infrastructure improvement made you would reverse? With respect to that question, it is a very good question, by the way, and we are in fact working with the SDOT and WashDOT and our legal department and their legal department are currently working on what is the memorandum of understanding with regard to the surface street, because it's the way that the deal worked is that the state appropriated, and our expectation was that we would do the design and construction. So questions start to arise about, does the state want to give us all the money? Because there might be concern about cost overruns on the tunnel. I mean, it has been delayed, the tolling hasn't been what they thought it would be. And if they give us less than the money that's needed, less money, will that be enough for the project? Right? Might it cost less and we can have some cost savings that could be applied somewhere else? That's a fair question. But then how do you structure that agreement to make sure that, you know, we can actually afford to do what we need to do without the city necessarily having to pay for a commitment made by the state? And with regard to that final question of, you know, whether or not it's enforceable or not, the legislature has to pass another appropriation if there are cost overruns. That's not a question of legality. That's a question of politics. How is Senator Murray going to go to Olympia and ask them to give us more money when he voted for us to pay for the cost overruns? I don't get that.
This is a question for Mayor McGinn, and then I'd like to have Senator Murray respond to how he would make things different. Mayor McGinn, you often tout the inclusiveness of the neighborhood process and how it's neighborhood-based. If that's actually true, why do I see the same faces of the same power brokers throughout the city applying the one-size-fits-all plan to all the neighborhoods, upzone and gentrify?
Okay, that's a great question. When you talk about inclusive zoning, what we've started doing in this
I was
administration.
talking about inclusive zoning, I was talking about inclusive process, neighborhood
Yeah,
process.
inclusive process, sorry, but I'll get to inclusive zoning too, now that you've reminded me. Inclusive process is, you did, yeah. Inclusive process means that what we've done is, and we really started doing this for, you know, this is something that was really important to me, was that what we did was use what we call our public outreach liaisons. And these are individuals from different ethnic and immigrant and refugee communities who know those communities. So instead of sending somebody from SDOT or DPD to go talk to the neighborhood about what we're doing, and we all know what those meetings feel like. I went through dozens and dozens of them as a community council president on the Northwest District Council, you know, and we know who comes to those meetings. And those are wonderfully dedicated people, like they're my friends in the Northwest District. They're my friends, and I've made friends throughout the city with them. But there's all sorts of people that don't come to community councils, that don't come to Northwest District Council meetings, that don't come to an advertised town hall, and we need to go where they are, and that's why we hire the public outreach liaisons. So when I talk about being inclusive, that's what I'm talking about. We've really worked to get further out there, to talk with people, get their input, and put it into the plans. And you know, different plans have different attributes depending on what we hear from the neighborhood is important. And one of the things is affordability. And if we can get some more height and get more fee for affordable housing, that's good. And we've got a committee looking at the fact of if you give more height, please, this is my last 5 seconds. If we can get more height and include affordable housing in the project. We have a stakeholder group that's looking on that. We're looking forward to their recommendations on that as well. Because we did that on Capitol Hill, want to do it in the Valley too. More affordable housing, near transit.
Thank you.
What failure?
Could you repeat the question?
I just wanted to know.
It was really for me, Senator, so.
Why
He asked me to respond.
the mayor maintains the process is so inclusive.
Okay.
Why I see the same
Okay,
faces of the same power brokers applying the one-size-fits-all plan to every single neighborhood. And those outreach liaisons handpicked by the city.
Okay, I remember the question now, thank you. So, just to go back for a minute, you know, we have some international, or not national people have looked at our bike system, for instance, and have called parts of it very dangerous. And the mayor asked what I would do differently. I would go back and look at some of the information we've received around data, around danger, and those are the things I would change. You know, it's great just to say, pick out this thing. I believe that we need to make data-driven decisions and not decisions based on, I don't like this on this street. We need to talk about safety. But to get to your question, you know, I think we've lost a lot since we put together the neighborhood plans. And I think those were inclusive processes. And I think we can go back to that model. I believed it worked. And I believe we can go back and build on that model. In addition, you know, we can use technology in a way to involve people in neighborhoods that hasn't been used before, through social media, through simple things such as, you know, we can do cookie cutter town halls. Or we can do things like we've done in Olympia recently, which is we do a telephone town hall. So instead of 100 people showing up, I've had 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people in my district on the phone for a solid hour. And I hear things that I don't usually hear at the town halls. So I believe that we can open up the process, partly by going backwards to a process that I thought worked when I was worked on this council as staff. And I think we can go forward in opening up the process by using technology.
I do not think the end justifies the means. Outcomes do not matter as much as process. When you're sitting here and smiling sarcastically and nodding and then rolling your eyes, that's the combativeness in part that we're talking about. I voted for you and then lost trust because I saw that though you got voted at the very end by talking about now I won't stand in the way of the viaduct, please stop doing that.
I'm trying
Please
to do
stop
my
doing
best.
that.
I'm trying to do my
It's
best.
just
I really am.
annoying. It's just annoying. And though I voted for you, you then changed tune in a variety of ways. You supported Diaz.
Excuse me, you have 15 seconds for your question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, my real issue was racial inequality.
Yeah.
And you supported Diaz and the police brutality that is here and denied it as though as the mayor you have to support the police department.
your question?
I'd like you to answer those things that
Diaz?
I'm complaining about.
Sure. And I apologize if my facial expressions indicate in any way sarcasm or smugness or that I'm trying to dismiss your comments. That is not at all my intention. And, you know, and you know, I'm very happy to go out in public and take the heat, you know, and I've done that multiple times. I've done it at multiple town halls. And I take the heat, I hold myself accountable to the public, and I apologize if in any way I suggested I wasn't taking it seriously. I do my best to change that face for the record, because people say that occasionally I have it, and I guess it's a nervous habit. So again, my apology. The issue here is that you asked about police inequality, and I'll go to that one. That was a very serious issue, and I did the same thing there. We spoke to police officers. We spoke to Minority Executive Directors Coalition. You know, we spoke to the United Black Clergy. We invited everybody in to talk to us about what was important. And I actually took it really seriously about how to do it and do it well. You know, and I negotiated. I didn't take that first offer. And I didn't because I wanted our community involved. I wanted to make sure it worked for us. And at the end of the day, I think it's a good agreement. I really do. And we got everyone coming together. It was praised by Tom Perez and Jenny Durkin as a good agreement, too. It's been praised by civil rights leaders as a good agreement, and we're going to work on making it happen. And it was a rocky time and a hard time, but I really did my best to listen, engage, get into the details, and try to make it work factually. And I'm proud of the outcome, in fact, because we actually have everybody working together on this one right now. On the tunnel, I did say that I accepted the tunnel as the option, but I didn't support having to pay cost overruns. And my staff always worked to facilitate the work of the tunnel. And I raised the policy question of the cost overruns. And maybe I pushed too hard, maybe I didn't. But it is an important question, and it's still a live question, it turns out. So I've just always tried to be honest and straight with everybody about where I stand.
Thank you. Nothing?
Nothing to say.
I'd like to talk about the corridors around the state, the east to west, and that would be I-90 and 520. And we know that I-90 is going to be talked about for tolling for monies to finish 520. So 520 has been built pretty much through the east side. They got all of what they wanted at the state level with the funding that was available. And now we have a floating bridge, and we have a question mark on the west side landing. Now, the west side landing now is called the Waban. It's never been approved in an EIS or an SDEIS. It's coming into our city. It's gonna have 6 lanes, trying to skiddy down to 4 right outside of Montlake, which will impact all these neighborhoods in this corridor, and also rebalance the lanes from 90 to 520. So what is your answers for managing the traffic, the noise, the pollution from the cars being backed up on 520? And how can you work with WashDOT and at the state level to either get more funding or stop the building onto the west side as promised to the residents until it really gets funded all the way properly to the other side?
So, you know, the issue that is at the heart of your question actually it didn't originate with the current mayor. It actually originated in the last administration, when Seattle as a city would not come together as a city government with its communities and present a Seattle option for 520.
We did.
There was never a position from the Nichols administration or the council to Olympia as this is what we want. Different neighborhood plans, I keep forgetting it's one minute. Different neighborhood groups worked on different options, but the city itself never came forward. We still haven't come forward with the city option for the west side. There are things we can do to stop it, permitting and the like, but I don't think we should go there. And I think as with Sound Transit 3, to go through Olympia, we need to go through Olympia to get Sound Transit 3. And as I think with the 520 bridge, I'm the guy who can go to Olympia and get that mitigation dollars when the city has a plan. And that would be one of the goals we would work on early on.
Actually, there's a very interesting story behind this, and you may recall it. At the beginning of my administration, we held a press conference where we stood up with council members Licata, O'Brien, Speaker Chop, and Mr. Murray, and we stood up together to say we wanted a different look, we wanted a Seattle approach, and shortly thereafter we had a number of other city council members stand up with East Side legislators to argue for a different approach. So that was one of the challenges we faced from the beginning, is that this project was funded, started without knowing how we were going to finish it, without having a consensus on the finish line. And it's one of those things that push to get it going fast has led, I think, to those really serious issues with the defective construction on the pontoons, which is costing us a lot. So my staff is working at SDOT. We've been working on a series of workshops based on issues identified with the community around things like traffic, how Montlake Bridge will work, and others, and we'll just keep working on it with the community to try to get a design that at the end of the day minimizes the impacts on the adjoining neighborhoods. But it's hard work when there's already been so much set in motion for a much larger structure than I think is needed there.
Yeah?
I have 2 questions, and the second question is a simple yes/no for Senator Murray, so I'll ask the first one. A chief executive always relies on frank feedback from a small group of trusted advisors. JFK had Bobby, Bill Clinton had Hillary, George Bush had Condoleezza. Who are the 3 people in your own inner circle that you rely on to give you the straight skinny?
Is that for me?
For both of you.
Okay.
Is it a follow-up for you?
Sure. You know, the people who sometimes have been the people who've been mentors to me. Martha Cho comes to mind because she has been somebody who I worked for and really helped me learn how to be an elected official and a politician, which is still an honorable thing. The second one would probably be Wayne Ellers. He was Speaker of the House in the 80s. You folks probably don't remember Wayne anymore, but he was a great liberal. Some consider, next to Frank Chop, my seatmate, one of the best speakers in the House. The third person would probably be Pramila, who was the head of One America and has really, I think, done more than anybody in the last decade to identify and work on issues of marginal communities within our city and actually within our state. So those are 3 people that come to mind.
Yeah, it's probably a broader set than that. Senator Kip Takuda was a real valuable ally and advisor. Senator Kip Takuda, and I could always count on him because kind of felt like my conscience in a lot of ways. He always ended up in the same place, and we asked him to help us with police reform, for example, and recruiting from within the community. We got a great new recruitment plan out of that as well. I brought people into my office who I want, who we hash out things every day, and that, you know, I don't know really where you're going, whether outside or staff, but, you know, Darrell Smith, who's here today, is, you know, I meet with Darrell every day, along with my chief of staff, Julie McCoy, Ethan Raup, my budget director, Beth Goldberg, and Beth Hester, you know, are the people I meet with daily. Those are my 5 direct reports that we meet with almost every day to hash out how we're going to do things. When I have to go reach outside to you know, try to get some frank talk, you know, I reach out to people like, you know, Diane Narasaki, Estella Ortega, Lisa Dugard, and, you know, it's kind of more issue specific when you're trying to figure out how to deal with an issue. But the other thing is, if I may, the close, you know, who are your like insiders? I really want to emphasize, I have gone out, the most impactful on me are actually meetings like this. Frankly, your comments were very impactful on me, you know, because I go out into tons and tons of meetings, and I just take it, and it's changed me as a person, and it's changed me as a mayor to hear from people throughout every community. And that's been my style of trying to do things.
Well, the follow-up really quickly is for Senator Murray. Your husband, Michael Shiosaki, who you didn't name as one of your inner circle, and that's okay, is one of the 4th highest paid staff in the Parks Department. He reports directly to the Park Superintendent. In a Murray administration, would you require him to step down from that position because of conflict of interest?
So, you know, I think we're beyond the sort of Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, can you actually work in government if your husband's in government? As he told me, he loves his job. He's been there for, I don't know how long, I should know that, but I don't. We've talked to the Seattle ethics folks, actually he's talked to them, as well as consulted lawyers about if I did become mayor, how that would be handled. And it can be handled because, you know, it's not the only city or not the only government agency in the country where spouses work and where one has a supervisory role. As a result, during the campaign, he doesn't talk to me about parks issues. So when he has a bad day, he can't come home and tell me about his day. But as he said, he loves his job. He's going to have his own career, and his career is not going to stand in the way of my career. Or my career is not going to stand in the way of his career. Also, I should mention, you know, he is a great political advisor and on a lot of things, as are my 5 sisters and 1 brother.
Dennis? It's a 2-part question for both candidates. What would you do as mayor to remove the criminal activity and dangerous activity in the 3rd Avenue corridor between Pike and Pine? And the second point, when could we expect results?
Oh, the camera's gone.
Mike, you want to go?
The camera's gone.
Hold on.
Oh, time out.
20 minutes.
There, Joan, of course, this gentleman, okay, Al, okay, Lloyd, okay, very good.
So I have to tell you, sometimes, now that the camera's off, these things can sometimes be, forums can be tedious. Oh, but this one has been really fun, even our ability to have a little more interaction. So. I had to leave early.
I think one of the things that gets neglected sometimes in these meetings is, I'd like to show my appreciation for both of you. I think we're lucky to have people of your stature and intelligence and motivation vying for this job. And I just wonder if whoever doesn't make it, could they be deputy mayor?
I'm going on.
Anyhow, thank you for coming.
I'm going on my honeymoon.
Sometimes we forget to
All right.
And no, you can't leave yet.
All right, here we go.
Yes.
I'm sorry, oh yeah, back to Dennis.
Yeah, so 1-minute answer?
Yes.
Yeah, so, you know, we've added, over the last year, we've added, in the bad times, we did have to go down a little bit. We went down, the authorized force went down by 20 officers. We've since added 52 more authorized. We're hiring. We're also working on something called directed patrols, getting officers out on the street in the important places. And it's not just about officers and arrests. You know, the 50 most problematic people downtown, we checked how many times, 2,500 arrests. You know, so there's prosecution issues, there's substance abuse issues as well. So it's a combination of more officers and more appropriate, you know, services for those that aren't violent criminals who have substance abuse issues, or people that are homeless, or people with mental health issues. And my last budget puts more dollars into each of those areas. We put together a Center City initiative that came up with those recommendations. We're going to expand something called law enforcement assisted diversion which has treatment for those with substance abuse issues, and that's been promising in Belltown. And we hope as we add officers, add lead, we're going to start seeing some changes. But the reality also is we're a big city, and people with mental health issues that are untreated, people that are homeless, downtown is where we're going to see those issues. And we just have to keep working at it together.
So, very important question, but let me try and do this in a minute. So there are those I call people on the streets who are in despair. And as a result of the Affordable Care Act, which the legislature approved with some extra requirements that other states haven't, those homeless people are now entitled to mental health insurance. And we hear from many of our providers of homeless services, it's going to save them a lot of money, that they'll be able to take more people off the streets. So that's a piece of it. The other piece of it is, of course, we need a police force that is trained to deal with some of the issues that the Justice Department brought up. That's one part of it. The other part of it. The next part of it is we need to find a way to get more police officers in Seattle, and we've had this problem. Many administrations have tried, people who live in Seattle to actually become police officers. The last part of it is we need clear direction from the mayor and from the chief that when people are acting in committing crimes, that they are arrested. And I hear too often from police officers that they're not getting a clear message about what they should be doing on the street.
This really follows somewhat what Colleen had to say about the disconnect between the city of Seattle and the Washington State Department of Transportation. The fact is that the so-called West Approach Bridge North plan, I don't even know what that means. But this again is part of, kind of the Department of Transportation's somewhat juggernaut that's going through Portage Bay Area and Montlake. The question is, what can we do now? It's happening now. The elimination of Lake Washington Boulevard South exit and on-ramp on 520 is going to create enormous gridlock on 23rd and basically move the Mercer mess to the Montlake mess. Can you respond to what we can do to try and mitigate that sooner than later?
Which one?
You both want to go at it?
Yeah.
So, it goes back in my mind to actually getting the council and the city and the neighborhoods on a single plan. And I believe that we can, the Speaker of the House is from that area or represents that area. I believe we have the ability, and I believe I have the relationships in Olympia that when we come up with a plan about how we want to mitigate that, we can get there. We're not the only place in the state that has some terrible situations that they're asking for mitigation from. I think we can get there. Let me just give you one little example. This is a mini example, but it had a huge impact. The city wanted to open up the park between Capitol Hill, the freeway underneath the freeway between Capitol Hill and East Lake, and WashDOT wouldn't do it. So I finally just took the director out there and I walked him through it. And as a result of that, we have a very interactive way of reconnecting neighborhoods. I really do think we can move WashDOT forward.
The phrase you used of WashDOT being a juggernaut, we stood up, we raised these issues, and Senator Murray, we stood together then. We referenced the fact that the city council, some city council members went and advocated for something different, and we were trying to bring everyone together. Fact of the matter is, Speaker Chop then put I'm going to tell you a very brief story. Speaker Chop put a provision into law which said they couldn't proceed moving further west till they had full funding. I met with WashDOT folks, and they were telling me they were planning to move ahead. I said, you don't have the funding. And they said, no, it just said a financing plan, and here's the financing plan, so we can proceed. So they don't feel like they're under legislative control on these things. They really don't. They're an agency that feels they can push ahead. And I know the speaker keeps pointing to the city council and the mayor. We don't have a plan together, but we could really use some help down in Olympia with the people that are overseeing that to change that, because they are not listening to the legislature, and we really do need that leadership down there, because without that pushback, our bargaining position goes way down.
Yeah, having sat where you gentlemen are sitting 8 years ago with a lot less success, of course. My question to you is, what's your vision for the city?
Nice question.
What's what do you want from the city? All I hear when I read the Seattle Times is that you want another sports stadium, let's get back to Sonics, let's do this, let's do that. What's your vision? What do you want Seattle to be when you're dead and gone, when we're all dead and gone? What do you want people like me who are historians to write about, whichever one of you becomes the next mayor, and in your case, you have been mayor for 4 years. What do you want us to write about you? What do you want us to say was the greatest thing you did for the city of Seattle?
Which question do you want to answer?
Two
minutes.
2 minutes for the vision of Seattle.
2 minutes.
This could be a close. This could be the close, although we have more time and more questions, I suppose. First of all, I'm going to back up the Seattle Times. They write about a little more than the arena. They write about a lot of different issues. And I was actually moderated the Greenwood candidate forum with you and Mayor Nichols up in Greenwood. So I've been in Bill Bradford's seat. Handled it a little differently than Bill does. Having
Don't use that.
I'm sorry. You know, and that is a fabulous question, because that's why I ran, right? I ran because I really care about the future of Seattle. And I ran because I thought government was getting further away from the people. We weren't serious enough about education. We weren't serious enough about neighborhoods, and we weren't serious enough about climate change. So my vision is I would love to see us have every one of our schools be excellent. I would like to see universal preschool for all kids. I would like the people that provide childcare and early learning to be paid well. All of these things are in the works right now. I'd like us to work with all of our immigrant and refugee communities so that they can find their place at the table in this city. I'd like to improve wages and working conditions of low-wage workers so they can share in the circle of prosperity, and that's through policy actions as well as job training like Pathways to Careers. And when we have people that are educated, working, and fully engaged civically in the city, we are now in a position to really, do a lot more work. So I don't want our kids going to jail, which is why we've expanded the Seattle Youth Violence Prevention Initiative. I want us to invest in the quality of life in our neighborhoods, walking, biking, transit, parks, arts and culture. And you'll see my budget reflects that. We need to be compassionate to those in need. And we should lead on the environment, which is why I put together a statewide coalition to fight coal trains, why we're leading the nation in green building efficiency, things like the Bullitt Foundation building, and why I want us to be the first in the nation to divest from fossil fuels. I think we can be that city that is environmentally sustainable, respects and embraces every culture, and widens the circle of prosperity to include those that are left out.
So 2 minutes.
Thanks for the question. Often because the forums are issue, particular, you often read and hear in the media just that piece of it. So your question is very important. I was raised in a working class family, and you already heard a fairly large one in West Seattle. I've spent most of my life in this city. This city has given me an incredible opportunity to serve it in the legislature, to build a life that I could never have dreamed when I was growing up in West Seattle. But the city I knew was a city that was fairly egalitarian, even when people had money. It was a city where people could have working class jobs and own a house, which my parents did. They couldn't do that today. It was a city that had a sense of itself as a community and as something special. It's a city that dealt with some really difficult issues in the 60s and 70s and came through, unlike other cities, more healed than torn apart around issues of race and economics. So what I want to leave behind is a city that looks a lot like the Seattle that I've known and the Seattle that I've read about since its pioneer beginnings. That pioneer spirit that has always been innovative, whether it's been the fishing or logging industry, or now whether it's been biotech or high tech, that we create that innovative spirit, and that our city government becomes as innovative as the people in this city. I could talk about the challenges of immigrants, and I'm happy to have the endorsement of so many of them. I could talk about the challenges of business, and I'm happy to have the endorsement of them as well as labor folks. But I think it's more important to talk about how we view ourselves as a community that does things together, that once again accomplishes things together. And the issues of growth and transportation We are at risk of being ripped apart by these things. And I believe we can be that Seattle that I grew up in.
Joe?
The role of the mayor is to provide policies to direct the city. And what is absent and has never been addressed is to have the neighborhoods deal with the issue of what type of mix of housing they're to have in their neighborhood as low, middle, and low income housing. And then to have that formulated in their neighborhood plan and then adopted by the city. Wes Ullman, Royer, Rice, Shell, and Nichols has failed on addressing this issue. Would you be willing to handle this as a mayor? Or do you want to drop the hot potato and not deal with it? Because it's two issues, that policy issue on the mix of income of housing and then adopting the neighborhood plans as a legislative law, as a land use law, so that city council has to abide by it.
Yeah, this is a great question. It's a great question, and we do seek through our neighborhood planning to try to hit those objectives. And it's one of the reasons why we have the stakeholder group coming together to look at the different policies. The tension you get is you can set your policy objectives, but then what the land use code says is that if somebody comes in and, they meet the zoning code requirements for a piece of property under state law, you're entitled to build. It's a property right, and, it's for what it's worth. So we plan as best we can, but then we see what we actually get after we do the planning, and then we have to, calibrate or change or do things differently to make it happen. And I think that's an ongoing process where we start looking at, what's the payment in lieu that we should expect for affordable housing? Should we require including affordable housing in the property? When should we require parking or when should we not? Because it can increase costs and it may not be needed. And these are all, so the tools we have to get that end result of a full mix of housing, is an inexact process that we have to keep revisiting. And we've been working to try to do that with the neighborhoods and try to keep coming up with innovative different ways of hitting that objective. And again, as our city becomes more popular, it becomes even more challenging as more people move in.
So I believe that, you hear this from every candidate who runs for city council or mayor, that our neighborhoods are the unique thing that gives Seattle its special character. And it's true, and that's why they say it. But going back to some of the things I said earlier, I believe that you should also be able to design and be involved in how that unique character goes forward as the city grows, as the city changes, as different infrastructure designs come in. And I don't think you're involved in that now. And I want to empower the neighborhoods in a way that they haven't been empowered since before Greg Nichols. And it's just an incredible opportunity for you all to decide what the future of this city looks like. And I don't think that means that we balkanize the city. I don't think that means that it's NIMBYism, which I think is unfairly put out there too often. I think it actually will add to the incredible creative nature of the city. And the first thing I worked on, and this is when I went to work for Martha Cho 4 years ago, was the first chicanes that were put in Seattle. And my gosh, the fight that went on in those neighborhoods over those chicanes, I know it won't be easy. Just on that one thing, I learned early on it won't be easy, but we can do it.
What's a chicane?
A chicane is one of those things that slows traffic. They're half circles.
I have a related question, and this is really more about the tools. Mayor McGinn, I know you've heard this question before. What is your stand on development impact fees? Because I have a perception that those of us who are longer-term residents end up bearing an indivisible, an unequal share of the cost of new development, and there is a transfer of wealth into one pocket but a burden on another. Your response, please.
And could I just real quickly add a friendly amendment to her question? You responded to a group called Socially Responsible Development, and in your response, you stated that you felt that to make responsible development, developers should contribute to paying for affordable housing, neighborhood amenities like parks and open spaces. So you've kind of responded to that to some degree, but I want you to talk about that answer, so.
Do you want me to go? Is that what's the indication there?
1 minute? 2
One-
minutes?
1 minute.
1 minute, okay, in 1 minute. You're right. There's an imbalance, okay, that's the short answer. The long answer is, we have got to develop some tools to figure out what the market can hold in any given neighborhood. Impact fees and the like can be a lot higher in South Lake Union and downtown and some other neighborhoods because of the value of the land. In Lake City, the impact fees and other sorts of ways that we can work with the developers to return public good to the community are probably going to be less. The problem is finding that mix, that tool. We almost have to develop a market instrument that I don't believe we've developed yet. There were impact fees put in South Lake Union, but I really don't think that they're ones that are flexible enough for us to decide how to use them in other neighborhoods. So the answer is yes, they have to bear more of a brunt of it. We have to look at it, but we also have to create a scale that's predictable so that neighborhood and properties can have some idea of what that amount is.
Yeah, so there's one question about, how much public benefit can you expect from a new development? And it is different in different neighborhoods. I mean, we've seen, even in the boom times, some neighborhoods never got any new development at all, which tells us they weren't penciling out there. So there's a question of how much can you get, and that's part of the reason why we have the stakeholder group looking at how much can we get, and also how can we get it, payment in lieu versus requiring the housing in the facility. But then the question is, what do you ask for as part of that mix? And this city, generally speaking, has leaned towards affordable housing as being the highest thing we want, although we do allow things like historic preservation, transfers of development rights for rural lands, and all of these things are things that are, kind of up for grabs as we look at a neighborhood and as we update things as well. It's interesting, I think a year or so ago, 3 years ago, it was like, man, we need some jobs. A year and a half ago, it was like, it's good to see some cranes. Now it's, what's up with all those cranes, right? We kind of forget what it was like to be down in the dumps. And one of the things that's what's up with all those cranes is it does boost our property tax base, our sales taxes, our real estate excise taxes, which means that we can have more broad-based investments and expansions into some of the things we talked about. So what's the right mix and how do we do it? I mean, that's what this race is about, and that's what the legislative process is about, and that's what the planning's about, and we'll all talk about that.
Can I ask just one question? Are you equating incentive zoning bonuses, like affordable housing demands associated with incentive zoning, with impact fees, which are just purely development fees, which all the surrounding communities, municipalities collect? We do not. And those impact fees go directly to paying for street improvements and so on.
I equate them because because there's a certain, I mean, what we're saying is that when, and this is required by the code as well, when you give somebody more height, you have to require something back, right? And we do actually want to see some new housing built in the city. We do want to see some new offices built.
But that's not an impact fee.
No, it's technically not an impact fee, but in terms of it's dollars we're taking out of whatever the profit potential is in the project. For a private developer, we expect they're going to make some profit. We're trying to figure out how much of that we can pull back. Can I let me finish? Yeah, it does. Additional height hands out additional profit. We do want projects to pencil out, otherwise they won't build them and we won't get anything back. The question is, how much do we take back? And if it's an impact fee for parks, that affects the bottom line in the same way that an incentive fee for housing does. So it's just a mix of what we want to require from people. We also require, how much of a setback do we require? How much of a public plaza do we require?
That's
All
a
of
good
these.
excuse for not paying for the basic infrastructure. You're not paying for the basic infrastructure.
Well, we do require people to upgrade things like water hookups or sewer hookups when they come in. We do expect them to upgrade the streetscape.
What about the capacity of the system?
Well, if they're the first one for, a long way, they're gonna have to build a new feeder into the bigger pipe. I mean, that's something that we do expect. No, what I'm telling you is, this is in the mix, and if we're gonna ask for more impact fees over here, we have to recognize there'll be pushback to redo something else. So I think
You are equating that, because you are saying it's an impact fee. More means that you have one.
One question.
The more, yeah, no, I'm just, the fact of the matter is, there's so much we can get out of the profit potential of a project for things we want. And we do have to make choices between them, whether they're incentive fees or impact fees or other
Let's
things.
give that a go.
You wanna move on here.
So yes, I believe we, impact fees as other jurisdictions, we should, we need a mix of tools in our toolbox if we're gonna get at some of the basic infrastructure and other challenges the city has. So I know you want to move on, so I'll make it shorter.
Thank you. My question are about the camera traffic lights, camera tickets. I understand it's owned by a private company, and I want to know how much of the tickets the city would get. And then the tickets, which is about 250 or something, and really doesn't justify the punishment. And so what can you do to lower that amount? Because in this economy, 250 is really a lot, a lot of people. And some of them are installed in really just to make money in some neighborhood, in a local part. And that has nothing to do with any public safety. So we really need, one, to remove some of them that are really installed in the neighborhood that are unnecessary places. And what can you do to lower the price? And how much of that really goes to the city?
Yeah.
Where does that go?
Sure. So I presume you're referring to the traffic safety cameras we're placing outside of schools, or are you talking about red light cameras?
Red light.
Red light cameras. So both of them are, well, I'll talk about both, the red light cameras and the.
Actually both. Because
Both? Okay, I'll talk about both. I'll talk about both. And the fee schedule, the fine schedule is kind of set at a, we're following a state schedule. People can ask for a hearing for mitigation and oftentimes, but that takes some time. You can even do it online now or on phone. But the court does provide some mitigation, but they're done primarily for safety reasons. And the traffic safety cameras that we're installing, to answer your question, how much goes to the private vendor? It's a fee for service. So we negotiate what the fee is. The revenue from the cameras actually comes to the city of Seattle, after we pay the fees for the service being provided. And we are putting all of the revenues from the traffic safety cameras.
So in the percentage,
You don't know what the split is.
like
I don't know how much we pay for them. I don't think we're giving them a percentage of each ticket. I think we're paying them a flat fee to operate the cameras for us. But I'll have to double check on that to know exactly how we do it. But the bulk of the money, comes, we're gonna spend $14.8 million on safe routes to schools. And we've seen that the numbers of tickets have gone down in the first few months as people adjust to them. I personally would love it if nobody got a ticket for driving too fast near a school, because it has dramatic safety impacts. Somebody going 40 miles an hour, there's an 85% chance of death if they hit a pedestrian. Someone going 20 miles an hour, there's a 5% chance of death. So bringing down those speeds around schools is critically important. The other high-impact places are, red light running is a place where you can get high-speed collisions. And we have somewhere between 20 to 30 deaths a year on our streets, whether pedestrians or drivers or bicyclists. So there's a very important reason we do it. And we are trying to put that money back into improving safety. And we're again, I'd love it if we didn't pay a ticket at all because people were going slow.
I don't know the amount, so.
Now, we're at 11 o'clock. Ed had asked that we terminate the meeting, or at least your staff would say.
Well, I have another thing to get to.
Okay, you have another thing. So we're basically done at this point? Can you guys take one more question? Or?
How about a close? Why don't you give us both a close?
A closing question.
No, we're just a close.
Closing statement. Closing statement. Okay, 2 minutes closing statement.
Who opened?
How long do you want?
You
2
went
minutes is
first, so
fine.
why don't we give,
I gave first?
So,
Okay.
Ed, you want to go
Okay,
first?
sure.
All right, here we go, 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, thank you again. This has really been a spirited discussion and it's been fun. So it's been good. And you bring up really, really important points. I'm running for mayor because I want to bring this city back together. And one of the ways you bring the city back together is by re-empowering the neighborhoods. The issues that you brought up, I think, speak to our need to align how we deal with transit, how we deal with zoning, with how we deal with neighborhood planning. And you have my commitment to reinvigorate that process. You have my commitment to reinvigorate and enlarge the Department of Neighborhoods, to be there as your assistants on the ground throughout this city. It is so important that we get growth right. And if you don't help us get growth right, we will not get growth right. I'm also running because I have had the opportunity in my legislative career to work on, I basically work on big things, and I fail a lot, but I succeed a lot. Whether it was the Clean Car Bill, which gave us the cleanest air emission standards in the nation, whether it was the anti-bullying bill that said you can't be beat up because you're black or a sexual minority or your gender in our public school system, whether it was the civil rights bill that took 29 years. I spent the last 11 years working on that. Whether it was the largest transportation package in state history that this city voted for when it ended up on the ballot by a huge amount after 15 years of gridlock, or whether it was marriage equality that meant bringing together business and people of faith and activists, regardless of where you are in that issue personally. It's how I did it that I'd ask you to look at. I want to bring that skill set to the city of Seattle. I have been proud of my colleagues and the work that we've been able to accomplish in the Washington State Legislature, and I want to bring that, as I said, that skill set to this city so that we once again come back to what we talked about early, a common vision of what we are as a community. Again, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and you've been very interesting moderators.
You know, again, I ran for mayor. This is the first time I've ever held political office. And I was an advocate. I was a Greenwood Community Council president. I was an advocate in my neighborhood. I was an advocate within the Sierra Club. And I really did feel that government was just getting too distant from people, that we weren't focusing on what was important. In one of the questions, it was phrased that I was combative. I've been called divisive. But I want to say what I've tried to do is raise the issues in public and deal with them. And I'd say the opposite of doing that. If you don't do that, I think what we're guilty of is neglect if we don't raise the tough issues. And I think we can look at the state level, the federal level, and see the consequences of that. Your question about the depth of our underfunded streets, I mean, that's neglect over decades. The neglect of our schools, you know, where we have such a horrible graduation rate. We're 43rd in the nation on per capita spending per student. We have the most regressive state and local tax system in the nation. That's not tackling the tough questions. Even the DOJ. You know, people, our communities of color, our civil rights leaders have been complaining about mistreatment for decades. And it took high-profile incidents in the Department of Justice for us to actually deal with those. And I've stood up in front of people and had that dialogue with people, 153 town halls. And I've taken the tough questions and I've said what I believed in. And I've asked you what you believed in. And we've tried to work together to tackle those tough questions. And now we have a DOJ agreement that everybody praises. We've doubled the Families in Education levy and are investing more in education. We've expanded the Seattle Youth Violence Prevention Initiative. We've expanded paid sick leave. You know, we've built a coalition against coal trains. We want to be the first in the nation to divest from fossil fuels. We finished every year in the black and rebuilt the rainy day fund, and I want to work on getting universal preschool and transit to every neighborhood. We've expanded library hours. We've expanded maintenance funds. We're putting more dollars into sidewalks and local streets than we've ever done before. And we've done that because we're willing to face the tough questions. I'm willing to come out to any meeting and talk with people about how do we solve our problems. That's why I ran 4 years ago. That's why I'd love your vote again. And we're doing well in Seattle. We're doing better than a lot of other places because I think this is a city that's capable of facing the tough questions. That's what I've learned when I'm out in the community with you. And I'd love to have your vote, and I'd love to continue facing those tough questions together and build the city that we believe in. Thank you.
I want to thank Ed and Mike for coming out. I know this bunch is, everybody wants to ask the tough questions, and this group is not afraid to get up there and confront our leadership. I wish you both the best in this election. Thank you, Mike.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. See you.
You did great on your time. You did perfect. Not even flashing. Is that what it is?
A few years in Catholic school did it.
You only have one minute now.
What's that?
It seems to me that money, very quick, was raised.